We've been, as a board, excited and pretty charged up about the direction we're moving. And Anthony here is going to give you the meat of that report, but we're very happy with the direction of the company, and I think he's going to engage others, and I'll let you hear it from him directly, but there'll be time for question and answer after this portion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have a report for you. I recognize the speakers in the morning already, but I just want to provide additional response because I really felt it was a good morning of presentations. I want to thank Rob. Rob mentioned issues that matter to us, and Sealaska can work on these issues. And it means that Sealaska is more than a company that just provides dividends. We want to work with our communities, and we want to work on those issues that are meaningful for our people. I want to thank Doug. He's used a canoe parable, and you'll see when I move into my presentation, I'll weave it into the cover of our annual report. And he's used that story, and I thank him for calling to vote, and everybody that stood up and said, we need to vote. We need to do better than 56%. I want to thank Mick for calling out that we need stronger businesses. We absolutely agree. He also mentioned that he's heard a lot that we've kind of taken to our core cultural values. We don't think those are two separate things. We think we can utilize our values within our businesses, and it does not take one away from the other. We actually think it's additive, and I think it will improve our businesses, and that's actually one of our keys. The business is the focus, but we always want to be known as a Native organization, and to outside partners, our values are meaningful to them, and they want to have partners like Sealaska that they know have a value set. I want to thank Nicole from her message of coming together and working together. That's absolutely necessary. Thank Patrick for his service and his memories of the people that mentored him. That's meaningful to me when I think of Clarence Jackson and Marlene Johnson and Judson Brown and all the individuals that I had the honor to be with, whether it was dinner or just hearing them in conversation. It was very meaningful to me. I want to thank Karen for recognizing that change is hard, and the management and the board need to support each other. We're working that way, and it's a meaningful difference for us. I want to thank David for his speech in Tlingit. It was absolutely amazing. I was stunned. I'm a language learner, and I picked up some of them. He did say that our grandparents' words give us strength. Again, that's meaningful when I think of my clan uncle Clarence Jackson and all his mentorship. I feel that he's here with me whenever I speak, and thank David for recognizing all that our ancestors have given us. So I'll move on to my presentation, which is about the annual report. So we provide an annual report to give our shareholder base as much information about the financial results of Sealaska, but we also want to present as much information as possible about the direction we're going, the strategies we're utilizing, and make sure that it's readable information, that the financial results make sense. So we have sheets on your table, and if you open up the middle of the information you have on your table, you'll see us break down all the different components that make up Sealaska's income sources. Mick mentioned all the losses. He's talking about losses after 7i and investment income. Sealaska made $12 million that last year, and I'll walk through the different components that made that. But, the asset base that we have is very strong. We know we have to focus on business. We're going to continue to talk about that, and we're creating a lot of progress in that area, and that has to be the focus. But we can't ignore the strength of our land base and our investment portfolio. Those are meaningful income sources to Sealaska. And when I talk about the cover and the way Doug talked about it, Doug said when you have a leaky canoe, you don't just keep paddling. You fix the leaks in the canoe, and then you keep paddling. Sealaska had some struggles. We had some operational struggles. We took the time to appropriately fix all the leaks. We sold businesses that didn't fit our values, that weren't offering enough financial performance, that weren't in areas that could provide meaningful shareholder benefit, whether that was companies in Miami, Mexico, Alabama, Iowa. We've sold those businesses and we've rededicated our business efforts in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, and I'll talk about that. But one of the things that you see in a canoe, our traditional canoes had stability in motion. When they were moving, they were stable. When you're getting into a canoe, you get into it and it feels tippy, right? We felt that was a great way to describe Sealaska. If Sealaska isn't making progress, there's waves, there's tippiness. You can feel it. When we are making progress, when we're moving forward, we have the stability that's going to lead us to even greater progress. And that's really what we're focusing on right now. Sticking to the strategic plan that we have and making sure that we give the shareholders the correct sense of the progress we're making. So I do have a presentation, if we can get that up. I mentioned the $12 million in net income in 2015. If you go through the financials, that's kind of the bottom line number, the bottom line result. But again, the middle sheet that you have on your table breaks that down into many different components. And actually, I'll describe the key sources before talking through how they all add up to that $12 million. I mentioned the value of our land base. It's not just our land base. It's all of the ANCSA Corp land across Alaska provides income into what's called 7I revenue sharing, 7I natural resource sharing. Sealaska has put over $300 million that has been shared amongst all the regional corporations. And now we receive significant sharing of natural resource wealth from other corporations. So it's all comes from the land base. Our investments, the board has been dedicated to strong investment performance and dedication and responsibility to keep significant funds and investments that can modulate the business performance that we see. And it's been a strong source of dividends for our corporation. Over the long term, it should provide close to $7 million in income to Sealaska on an annual basis. But in any given year, it can be up or down. Again, ANCSA 7I, strong asset. It's very meaningful to Sealaska, but we don't control it right now. And again, just like investments, any given year that our 7I income can be up or down. And in the charts I show you, it shows you why we've stayed dedicated to the majority of our conversations being on the last component, our businesses, taking the time to right-size our portfolio, taking the time to understand where we want to make investments and where we want to build our businesses, which is, again, is in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. These three sources create the $12 million in income that Sealaska showed in 2015. And I'll start kind of with a simplified version of what you have in your packages. So the $12 million is indicated by the green bar, and the other bars show where that income was created. So you see the very large bar was income we received from 7I revenue sharing. That was the bulk of what Sealaska earned in 2015. You see our investment income. Last year was a tough investment year. We invest globally, so when the stock market isn't doing well or the bond market isn't doing well, any given year we can have losses. Over the long term, it should be positive, but again, any given year we can't rely on that, and that was shown in 2015 when we showed slight losses from our investment portfolio. We have operating income that right now, again, we are turning around and focusing on. That was additive to the net income. And then we have the cost structure of Sealaska that includes everything that we do in Juneau down to Ketchikan, and we do to make sure that we can create income from these three sources. So when we think about these components of Sealaska's net income and how we want to see change, This is 2015 in comparison to 2014. So in 2015, or in 2014, we made close to $15 million in income. So in 2015, there was a $3 million decline in our income. You see that's the green bar. You also see what was the major factor in seeing a slight decline in our income, which was, again, the investment income. The previous year, the markets were doing well. We made investment income from our portfolios. Last year, the market was tough, and we actually saw about a $7 million decline in our investment income. But what I want to highlight is the two circled areas, the things that we're working on, the things that we're talking with our board on a daily basis, the things we want to see improvement. We are seeing improvement. We saw close to a $2 million increase in our operating income, and we cut costs by close to $1.5 million in 2015. If I go to 2016, because again, the annual report just isn't about looking at the past. We want to give our shareholders a good sense of what we expect in the future as well. In 2016, we expect our net income to be about $15 million. And you see, again, indicated in the green bar there. What you do see is that 7i revenue sharing is not that large component of our net income anymore. The drop in oil prices, the drop in mineral prices have significantly affected what we receive from the other regions, and we see a big decline in 7i in 2016. The positive is we believe that the investment income will be meaningful to a meaningful income source in 2016, and we've made close to $7.5 million in operating income improvements that we're working towards in 2016. So again, if we look at the change, if we weren't focusing on increasing our operating income, we'd be in a difficult situation facing a $12 million decline in 7i income in 2016. Because we're focusing on our operating income and creating $7.5 million in operating income improvements, it really offsets that decline from our income sources that, again, on an annual basis, we can't control. The things we do control, our businesses, are showing the improvement. And I'll start transitioning into how we're creating that progress, how we're creating the improvements in our operating income and in our cost structure. I mentioned already how we've sold businesses that didn't make sense. We've dedicated ourselves to making a long-term commitment to businesses that do make sense to Sealaska. You know, we spent a lot of time on the panel talking about Aaní and our natural resources, our land base. That's going to be a core part of Sealaska long into the future. We're making a long-term commitment to natural resources. We've been in government contracting for over 10 years now. That government contracting focuses on water and maritime services, environmental remediation. Those are things that are meaningful to us as a people, the ability to improve water quality, improve the environment. Those are the contracts we're working on within our government services entities. And finally, the new investment we just made in seafood and natural foods. We spent about 2 years looking for an industry that was investable in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Seafood, which we have invested in the past, still makes sense for Sealaska. It's a major industry in the region. We know we can invest in it. We know we did a lot of research to find out where the major risks are, and I'm going to actually have our Chief Operating Officer come up and speak to our industry review of the seafood industry. But we took a fairly conscientious and cautious approach to not invest in the resource side right off the bat. We've invested in a processing facility that doesn't own resource. And all of us, I grew up commercial fishing. Our chair grew up commercial fishing. I bet the majority of our board grew up commercial fishing. Everybody in this room either has commercial fished or knows a commercial fisherman. We know that in any given year, you face either high prices or low prices, and you face either high volume or low volume with what you're going after, especially in the salmon market. So we wanted to avoid as much of the cyclical risk of the seafood industry avoid issues of low price years, low volume years, even high volume years can create issues. And so Terry will talk about how this processing facility that we just purchased is going to be a core to growing our position in the seafood industry. And we're going to focus on the processing side, the marketing side, and kind of the retail side of seafood. And when we build a good core base there, then we'll start looking at the resource side, and we're going to look first at Alaska resources. And that vision is growing. We have the investment capital to invest in this industry, and I think because we've thought it out so much, because it fits our values, because it's investable in the region, we can make the long-term commitment to these industries that Sealaska hasn't made in the past. The only operating unit that we made a long-term commitment to has been natural resources. I think the ability to make a long-term commitment means we can invest in those businesses, we can grow expertise in those businesses, we can find the right partners to operate within those businesses, and it was all strategies to make sure we do not find ourselves in some of the same operating history that we've had and that's been highlighted. So I'll talk really quickly before I bring Terry up about Aaní and balanced land management. You know, on the sheet, and what hasn't been discussed, but you can see it on the sheet, we are dedicating actually a minority of our land base to the sustainable harvest. You know, under 40% of our land base will be in that sustainable harvest. We've maintained mature forest on the majority of our land base, and there's lots of opportunity on that forest that we haven't put into our timber harvest. Carbon credits was mentioned. The local harvest of blueberry and spruce tips, wetland mitigation. I'll speak a bit about carbon because it is something that we expect to potentially announce over the summer, a deal to move forward with the carbon project. We're putting this 65% of the mature forest into a carbon project. It's not going to affect the ongoing timber business. So we don't want partners to say, hey, they're putting all of their land into carbon, they're going to be getting out of the timber industry. We're going to maintain our commitment to this small-scale timber industry, again, not only for the financial benefit to Sealaska, but also for the jobs and the community benefit. But carbon's going to be a big part of utilizing and searching for alternative ways to benefit from our land base rather than just timber. And that's been a dedicated focus. The board has pushed us to look at as many alternative uses as possible for our land base. And again, not just for the financial benefit, but also for the community benefit and the cultural benefit. We put aside almost every totem quality, canoe quality log that we're pulling out of our forest to donate to organizations that are doing totems and canoes. You know, we do cedar bark, and we collect cedar bark. We do the carving blank program. These are other programs that we're utilizing that show kind of the cultural value we have in utilizing our land base for cultural purposes as well. So as I move and ask Terry to come up, Terry will talk about what he sees the value of being in relevant industries to us. Terry has a great business operating background. He's worked with global companies across the world. He's focused on improving business results and growing businesses, and he's focused on doing that through an acquisition process, which he also has tremendous expertise in. So he'll talk about what relevant industries mean to him, and then he'll also move on to the investment process. Thanks, and you know, Terry is a big believer in how our core cultural values fit into our businesses, and as he spreads this message, he's seeing great response from our business partners across all of our businesses, and he can speak to that as well. Terry?
Thank you, Anthony. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I'm just going to cover a couple more slides to build a little bit on what Anthony said. As we were selling companies and also radically simplifying the organizational structure of Sealaska, over the last few years. At the same time, we started to think about the sort of businesses we should invest in. So the guidance we were getting from the board is they wanted to invest in businesses that were relevant to the history and culture of Sealaska, and also that were substantially located in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, because in the past, the bulk of the businesses we had sold, they didn't fit either of those criteria. So up for the last couple of years, all our businesses are now profitable, and the improvements in operations profitability that Anthony talked about are mostly coming from our existing investments. But what we're looking to do is put more capital, a lot of it from selling the assets such as Nipro that we sold in the last few years, back into these new businesses that we've identified, into these new three companies. So as we were looking to decide what to do, we literally looked at thousands of companies. Within the seafood industry itself, we looked at hundreds of companies. But I'll talk about the government services business first. We were already pretty strong in environmental monitoring, largely around monitoring water spills and doing cleanup for the government, mostly the Corps of Engineers and the Navy. So we were already doing that in the Pacific Northwest. We had a good reputation. So, that was something we decided we could build on. And as we were thinking about, how we could knit all of this together, if you like, make all of our businesses really resonate toward an overall vision for Sealaska, it occurred to us that fundamentally, an organization whose ownership has a culture of subsisting from the ocean for literally thousands of years is probably and should be one of the most powerful voices in helping all of us understand how best to use resource from the ocean and how best to protect the capacity of the ocean to sustain that resource. Because, America's been an industrialized economy for hundreds of years, but native people have been doing that for thousands of years. And we felt that their wisdom and their connection to that resource and to the region was very relevant and very valuable. So what we sought to do was figure out how we could build businesses that really were built around that connection. And the most important asset that they had was that unique understanding and connection to the resource. So that's really what we've been doing for the last 2 years. So the businesses are already fit. We built around those, built on those, and concurrently started to look at additional investments. So on the water services side, like I said, we already had several pretty strong businesses. There was a lot of things we were doing in government services that didn't fit. There were either pass-throughs or we're doing some guard gate security in Peru. We were doing third-party logistics in Atlanta, Georgia. We decided to get out of those things. Those things were losing money. So by getting out of them, not only did we focus ourselves and our organization on our future direction, but we also saved money. And then we looked at doubling down on the areas that did make sense. So the most obvious one to us was water. Sealaska is an organization that intends to be around for a very long time. And so we were looking for businesses that had strong, long-term, very basic economic drivers behind them. And in the western half of the United States, nearly every watershed is stressed, and that level of stress is increasing. In the Central Valley of California, which is the food basket, especially with respect to fruits and nuts for most of the United States, people are drilling down and using water that in some cases is 20,000 years old. Obviously, this isn't sustainable. So the ability to work toward improving the quality of our water supply is not only directly related to the health of the oceans in a very obvious way, which is part of our new vision, but it's also essential. It's a huge strategic issue facing the entire human race, but particularly the western half of the United States. It's going to be with us for decades. So this is a business that has very basic long-term fundamentals behind it. And that was important to us too, in addition to its connection with us. We get good at this. It's something that's always going to be needed. So we set about thinking about, well, how do we take this business to the next level? And the number one area that we like is adding oceanography to this. Most of our businesses now are professional services, which means they're highly skilled people offering advice and or expertise and or data to various branches of the federal and state government. And from that work often leads to construction work because, for example, if we're doing studies on stormwater runoff, which is one of the biggest issues, polluting the Puget Sound, then after that, the government agency wants to implement that solution. It may be some kind of impoundment or construction design. We also offer that service too. So by doing the consulting work, we're with the agency early, helping to formulate the solution, and then later in the process, beginning to actually execute that solution or be a part of it if it makes sense. So from that point of view, our environmental business, our construction business, and our data management business within our water services division makes sense. So like I said, we are looking at acquisitions. We're looking at a maritime acquisition right now that is an expert on Alaskan-based oceanography. One of the challenges in that sector right now is the decline of the oil and gas industry. So it's going through an evolution, as you all know. And because of the decline in oil and gas, which was very profitable, it's become much more competitive. So we're in the process of making sure we execute that acquisition and create value. We already have most of our assets now invested in the market. We're only going to invest in businesses if they will make a substantially better return than the money we already have in the market. If they won't, it's more risky to run a business. Unless it's making 3 or 4 times the return, it doesn't make the sense to make that investment. And our businesses are already profitable. So we're not forced to make these investments. We're making them at the rate at which we can find them and really feel good that they're the right thing to do for Sealaska in terms of fit and in terms of using its money very responsibly. Another area that we are growing into is taking our services businesses more deeply into Alaska. Now, when I first joined, it was like a little bit disappointing to me that we didn't have a lot of activity in Southeast Alaska within our services business. We've done some work in the Aleutian Islands, but really we had nothing in Southeast. So we're starting to get into several projects for the Forest Service and other state agencies in Alaska, and we're forecasting that next year we'll be doing about $5 million worth of work here. So it's not a lot, but it's a step in the right direction and something that we want to build on. So in addition to the oceanography company, we're looking at several Alaskan-based either environmental remediation firms or specialized construction firms. So having said that, I'll talk a little bit about seafood. The seafood industry is obviously something that Sealaska has been in before. We were very careful to understand this industry because many of the companies we had looked at or had been offered for sale had lost or were in the process of losing pretty substantial amounts of money, most usually because of antiquated equipment and or they weren't able to utilize their equipment year-round. And in a lot of cases because they were processing primary resource, so heading and gutting fish out of the ocean, making a very small margin on that, and taking a lot of risk that as they owned that resource, the price of it could fall substantially, and therefore they'd lose a lot of money. So it's always risky when you're looking at any industry from outside the industry, and it's an industry that you don't have management that are knowledgeable about. So we wanted to make sure that our first investment in seafood did not have any of those risky criteria that we had seen many, many times lead to problems, both under Sealaska's historic ownership and in a lot of the companies we're analyzing. So we didn't want to be exposed to businesses that couldn't, use their assets through the year. We didn't want to be exposed to businesses that were just buying and selling primary resource with a very low, value add. And we were also very concerned about businesses that weren't able to operate year-round. So what we did was we looked at many different opportunities, and finally we settled on a custom processor that's actually based in Seattle. But this custom processor the majority of the seafood it processes is wild Alaskan resource. The reason why we like this business and the industry in general, with respect to the fundamentals, similar to what I talked about water, is that wild Alaskan seafood, I don't need to tell all of you, but the world is one of the healthiest things you can eat. If you talk to nutritionists about their top 10 healthy foods, they probably won't agree on many of the things on that list. But the one thing that pretty much every nutritional scientist will agree on is that wild salmon is one of the top 10 most healthy things you can eat. In addition to being healthy, wild seafood is probably the most energy and water efficient source of protein on our planet. Beef takes 50 kilocalories to grow for every kilocalorie of energy that you get from eating it. It's a very, very inefficient source of resource. So as our lands, as our environment is put under strain, it's harder and harder and harder. And as people get richer, they want more protein. But wild seafood is probably the most energy efficient, the healthiest, and the least damaging source of available protein that's out there. So we take those things and put them together in terms of the risks we avoided and the fundamentals that we feel like are behind this industry and why we think Sealaska should be in it. And what this company does, IPC, is it takes, as I said, mostly wild Alaskan resource. It never actually owns the resource. It performs this service for the people that do. So the resource price drops. That does not affect its profitability. Because it's in Seattle, and because it's adding value to a whole array of different species, such as their cod, salmon, and also some farm fish, it's able to operate year-round. So because it can operate year-round, it can operate its assets, 3 or 4 times more per year. But most importantly, it can retain its employees. So it has very good, very efficient employees that work together really, really well. And as a result of that, it's incredibly good at what it does and can process seafood very efficiently and very profitably. And again, because it has many sources of supply, if one of those goes away, it can still be profitable. And we know this because we look back at its history and it had never lost money. So we feel really good about the fact we've taken the risk away. But with respect to the other side of the coin, getting people to eat more healthy, protein from the sea, what this business does most fundamentally is take wild resource and convert it into very easy to prepare products, either fillets or sourced portions that are frozen. So if you go to Costco and you buy Copper River salmon portions in a sauce, this is what they make. So it's able to make consumer-ready products that are easy to prepare and very nutritious. And we feel strongly that this is a way to get people to eat more seafood. Again, you all, of course, are experts of this and come from a region that's very familiar with handling and preparing seafood, but a large part of the world and a large part of the United States is not so comfortable doing that. So by turning these products, this very healthy resource, very efficiently into easy to prepare, very nutritious foods, we feel like not only are we fulfilling the mission of trying to find a business that really resonates with the history and culture of Sealaska, but it's also lower risk, and it's also doing something very positive to the world, which is helping people find very nutritious and sources of protein that are not damaging to our planet. So that's some of the high-level reasons. Now, the other advantage of having this investment is now we're able to look at the seafood industry from the inside. So now we have management and people and customers and suppliers, and as we're looking at follow-on investments, we can assess those from inside the industry, which substantially takes away the risk of further investments. And we're in the process of doing that right now. So again, in both of these verticals or businesses, like I said, we're in the process of looking at follow-up investments. Most of our capital will probably go into food and seafood. The government services business is less capital intensive, but we continue to look at investments in government services and in seafood and natural foods. And the fundamental thing we're looking to do is to find investment opportunities that offer substantially better returns than the passive investments we already have that money in today. So we do this carefully. We continue to do what we're doing in our existing businesses. We feel like the future's very bright. We expect, our businesses are profitable, but what we're trying to do is cover all of our other corporate costs from our business activities so that 7i and investment income is not being used to cover costs. That's our objective, and we feel like we're very close to that. And any capital we invest will just accelerate that process. So thank you very much for the time, and it's a real pleasure working here. And the reason we've been able to make the progress we've made to date, which I know may not feel as much as needs to be made, is because the board and the management team are working very closely together, and our board has had the courage to back this plan and stick with it through difficult times. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Terry. It truly is, on a daily basis, the business focus has really improved at Sealaska. Terry could speak about these two industries for another 3 hours. He's got so much information, has thought so much about this with the team, myself, our CFO, our general counsel, all our general managers, working to improve Sealaska's businesses. Not only the results that we have improved, the $3 million in improvements we saw in 15, the $7.5 million in improvements that we expect in 2016. You see in the middle sheet, we expect those results to continue forward based on this investment process. And I do have a final slide. I mentioned how Rob mentioned it's not just about the business. There's other issues we want to tackle. But the business results allow us to serve our shareholders. We need financial profitability, and we believe that if we follow the strategy of defining and operating in industries that are relevant to us, if we improve those existing businesses with the integration strategies we've utilized to cut costs and create greater efficiencies, and if we create an investment process that can help further grow those businesses, it's going to lead to sustainable business operations that Sealaska has not had in its over 40-year history. And it's going to lead, because the business results isn't the end-all for Sealaska, the business results allow us to grow our benefits to our shareholder base. That's what this strategy is going to lead to, and that's what we want to show our shareholders. As we see improved profitability, we need to talk with our shareholders about the things that Rob mentioned. What should we be working on next? We've already heard from Jody that increasing our scholarships, that's going to be important. We want to do that with our funds. Increasing economic development in our communities that need more jobs, that's going to be a focus. Senior services, we hear that a lot from our communities. The business results will drive our ability to serve and tackle some of those issues, and we're dedicated to it every day. And I thank the board for helping us with this strategy, pushing us towards this strategy, focusing on the profitability. And I thank all of you for joining and listening to us today. And I hope it's just one point in time that you learn more about Sealaska. We want to keep the information going and keep you as well informed as possible about the progress and the business results we're creating. Gunik Cheese, thank you.